Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another Waukegan History Museum Lunch and Learn on Facebook Live. My name is Ty Rohr. I'm sitting here at home in Waukegan, Illinois, in my Cubs jersey and hat, ready to share stories of Waukegan's favorite pastime with you all, baseball. First off, well, I hope everyone out there is doing well. Now, before I get started, I want to take a moment to remember Ed Link. Ed was Waukegan's official historian, and he passed away earlier this year. Baseball was one of his many passions, and so much of what I have here today comes from Ed. In fact, I'll be reading verbatim a lot of what he wrote on the subject. Now, Ed told me once that when you have something perfect, like his writing, then why redo it? Why do it again? So Ed will be with us for today's stories. However, until I came around, Ed thought that baseball started in Waukegan in 1872. Now, doing some newspaper research on the Civil War, I found that the history of baseball in Waukegan goes back to the year 1859. This was one of the very few times when I was able to find something that Ed had not already found. But he was happy because baseball again was a passion. Now in 1859, Waukegan had just been incorporated as a city. And citizens wanted to make sure that Waukegan was never behind the times, and a group of prominent men got together to form one of the new fashioned institutions of the time, a baseball club. The men assembled on the evening of April 8, 1859, which was a Tuesday, at the rooms over Peter Edwards' jewelry store, which was on Washington Street. And it was here where they organized the baseball club. So in this picture that you're looking at, this is downtown Waukegan, Washington Street, looking towards Genesee Street there. In the very background, we see the very first Lake County Courthouse. But you can see P.W. Edwards Jewelry Store here in this picture. And then the second floor there, that's where the prominent men gathered to form the baseball club. Now at this first meeting, it was determined that the organization needed to start right away. Officers were voted upon, and a constitution and bylaws were adopted. 21 men paid the fee of 50 cents to enroll in the club on the first night. Another 20 paid the following week. There are familiar and important names found in the list of members of this baseball club. Names such as Ferry and Hutchinson, who would both be mayor. Other prominent men included Corey, Dickinson, Greenleaf, Mills, Tiffany, and Wright. And their ages varied, from 20 years old being the youngest that we have found, to the oldest being 44. It was decided that the first game would take place at the playgrounds below the bluff in front of D.O. Dickinson's office. They scheduled the game for Saturday, April 12th at 3 p.m. William Wright and Peter Edwards were appointed captains, and they chose their players from the members of the club. The game was announced in the Waukegan Weekly Gazette. It said, "We expect to see a large gathering of our citizens to witness the game, and there will no doubt be a crowd should the weather be favorable. We think the Waukegan Baseball Club has started off under the most favorable auspices and with harmony and action, it will prove a source of much enjoyment to our citizens, particularly to those who are members of the club. The following Saturday, the newspaper gave an account of the first organized baseball game in Waukegan. From the Waukegan Weekly Gazette, dated April 23, 1859. Baseball Club. This institution, as it may now be considered one of our institutions, opened with the first game of ball as per announcement on Saturday afternoon last. Those who participated in the game appeared to enjoy themselves to the fullest extent, as did also the large crowd of our citizens who assembled to look on and see the fun. The members of the club do not consider themselves very well posted as yet in the rules and minutiae of the game. Consequently, must not be expected to show off to quite as good advantage now as when they are better practiced. The club will meet again today if the weather proves fine. They are fixing up playgrounds on the occupied lot by the Horse Growers Association just west of the residence of James McKay. So here we see the baseball grounds, also the trotting park, eventually becomes the Waukegan Fairgrounds. So after that first game down on the flats below the bluff, they move the games up to the baseball grounds. So this is close, if you're familiar with Ray Bradbury Park on Park Avenue, very close to Washington Park as well. It's within that general area for you. And here you see it, a picture taken from the courthouse. Now, another baseball club was organized in 1867, the Dexter Baseball Club of Waukegan. 28 members apparently played as the Star Baseball Club. Another group, Acme Baseball Club, was also listed. Now, the next couple pictures I'm going to show you aren't necessarily pictures of the teams I'm talking about, but they are pictures of early ball clubs that we have from the collections of the Waukegan Historical Society archives. One more team was the Athlete Baseball Club, organized April 1st, 1872. With 15 members and W.H. Burton as its president. Another three groups, Belvedere, National, and Waukegan Baseball Clubs, were formed in 1874, with 13, 10, and 13 members respectively. The roster of each team is listed in the 1874 City Directory. It is unknown how often the teams played or against whom, but an October 31st, 1874 news article stated that the famous Colored Nine from Chicago, known as the Uniques, were in town to play a local team. Teams seemingly came into and went out of existence, but there were always another to take its place. Thomas McCann noted a team was organized in 1878 and lasted until 1882 and played at the fairgrounds. Other sources say there was a 4-team league at that time. From 1884 to 1886, the Waukegan team also played there. And it was during this time, August 12, 1885, that journalist Hobart Yard noted that a female baseball team was to play a team of men at the fairgrounds that afternoon. He did not note the results of that contest. In 1894, the teams played on Washington Street at the Philippine Grounds, the south side east of Lewis Avenue, and the following year on Jackson Street. The later year had one team for the Waukegan Bachelor Club, and that group included two future mayors of the town, Julius Bittinger and Theodore H. Durst. By 1899, play was held on Jackson Street where the high school is today. A fence was erected around the field, making it the first enclosed park in the city. In 1902, West End Park was built at today's Weiss Field, and in 1911, a field on Marion Street was also used. Local teams operated under many different names in the early years. Some were Waukegan Cubs, Waukegan Naps, South Ends, the West Ends, the Waukegan Baseball Club, and the Olympic Athletic Club. Competition was fierce among the teams throughout the county, with the county championship a valued prize. Waukegan, Highland Park, and Everett won in various years while playing against Lake Zurich, Great Lakes Naval Station, Deerfield, Rockefeller, Lake Forest, and others. Waukegan won the county championship in 1911, 1912, 1913, 1915, and 1916, with Highland Park interrupting the string in 1914. There were many opponents from outside the area as well. In 1906, Waukegan won 5 of 7 games played against teams named White Rocks, All Chicago, Gaynor and Kohlers, Chicago Edgars, and others. Other opponents in other years were the Royal Giants of Chicago, who were the African American champions of the world, the Joliet Standards, Chicago Maroons, and the Chicago Lawndales. An important contributor to the development of local baseball was actually not a player. Thomas H. McCann managed local teams for many years around 1910. In 1914, he wrote a history of Waukegan baseball. Also in 1914, he built a ballpark on Marion, or South Genesee Street, north of May Street. 1,600 feet of fencing made a 7-foot barrier, and the grandstand seated 800 with bleachers on each side. In later years, he served as the Waukegan alderman, and he was alderman for 20 years. Here in the picture, you see the first game of the City and Lake County Series, McCann's Park, as it became known later on, also called the Waukegan Baseball Grounds. That picture is dated September 3rd, 1916. Among the teams that McCann managed was the 24-win, 2-loss team in 1913. It claimed the best record of any semi-pro team in Illinois. Many felt it was the best team ever assembled locally, and their record would add to that credence. One of its opponents was the Southern Bloomer Girls, who came here for 2 games in August. Their team name is a bit misleading since 2 men were on the team. Waukegan won both games by identical scores of 8-1. Pitching for the girls was Nehemiah, the same name as a Waukegan pitcher. Perhaps he was loaned to the opposition for the game, or some unusual coincidence occurred. Obviously, these teams would not have been successful without quality players. Individual records did not survive to the present, but many of the names did. Without intending to slight any of the players, here are some that stood out. Ed Ahlstrom, later Lake County Sheriff and Waukegan Chief of Police, he is credited with hitting the longest home run in McCann Park. Harry Ahlstrom, Ed's brother. Harry had a tryout with the Cubs. George Cinder Williams. Many considered him to be the fastest player in Waukegan's history. Arthur Bicky Wilkinson. He was on the first baseball team organized at the high school, and he, along with Williams, played on the 1913 team. He was so impressive in an exhibition game that the Cubs would have signed him if not for his age. And John Patty Driscoll. He played on the Southside team, but his fame came later when he played for the Cubs, as well as the Bears and Cardinals football teams. He coached the later 2 teams and was inducted into the College and Professional Football Hall of Fames. Now, as we know, living here in Waukegan, well, it's not Arizona or Florida. We do have winters, but that doesn't mean that baseball ends. One little known aspect of baseball in Waukegan was the games played indoors. Not much is known of the extent of those games or the years they were played. Only occasional references to them have been found with little explanation involved. Journalist Hobart Yard wrote in 1893 that an indoor league was formed at the YMCA. Games were to be played in Sears Hall, located above Wheeler Bookstore, Ingalls Jewelry, and Watrous Hardware on North Genesee Street. A newspaper article written by William White many years later referred to the same league, but added that teams represented Washburn and Moan, along with YMCA members. Teams from the Chicago area came to play the locals, and one of the Washburn and Moan players was Jack Statz, father of Arnold Jigger Statz. The next reference found to date was a December 9th, 1913 article in the Waukegan Sun that stated an indoor league composed of YMCA members was formed that day. 4 teams made up the league, and one of them would be chosen to play out-of-town teams. A 1917 Sanborn insurance map lists baseball game at 123 Washington Street amid a row of stores and restaurants. In a January 27, 1926 article on Nick Keller, it was stated his hobby was indoor baseball. Keller was a proponent of local baseball and a promoter of the Stanic Brothers team, and I'll talk about them in a bit. And the YMCA that is referenced here, well, it's the original YMCA, which was located where the Genesee Theater is today. It was determined that that was the perfect spot for the premier entertainment venue, so that first YMCA was torn down, and then the new one built across the street from where the current Waukegan Public Library is today. But the buildings look very similar. And a little bit about more recent local teams. They have been and continue to be an integral part of the sports scene. The high school first organized a team in 1906. Participation in succeeding years was intermittent as interest kind of came and go. Finally, in the 1920s, baseball stayed as an interscholastic sport. Success culminated in Waukegan High School winning the Illinois State Championship in 1971. A dozen years later, Waukegan West repeated that feat. Youth teams had provided an outlet for hundreds of youngsters. Many of the major league players cited elsewhere learned how to play on these teams. Success on a larger stage came for several of these teams. In 1969, Waukegan American Legion won state title. 1974, Broncos won the state title. And in 1978, North Shore Colts World Series winner. And now, the Stanic Brothers. A fascinating and fun little story here. Separating Stanic Brothers fact from legend is often difficult. Many of the stories were passed along verbally, and fading memories enhance many of them. Written confirmation generally doesn't exist, or was written so long ago after the fact that the faded memories took hold there as well. There was no need to commemorate the facts at the time. This wasn't national news. It was just 10 brothers playing a game they loved and playing it extremely well. Born between 1895 and 1914, the brothers played many sandlot games in the vacant fields of North Chicago in the 1910s and the 1920s. As the youngest became old enough to play, they formed an all-brothers team and took on challengers. In the late 20s, they were promoted by Nick Keller. At the time, Keller was the Waukegan City Commissioner of Public Works. First elected in 1923, and reelected 4 years later, Keller was a proponent of baseball locally, and you must have known his stuff as he, at various points in time, served as a scout for the Chicago White Sox, as well as St. Paul and Milwaukee of the American Association. By being promoted and by being as good as they were, the brothers came to the attention of Wyoming's Marlett brothers. The 9 of them from Hawk Springs, near Cheyenne, challenged the Stanczyks to determine a brothers' championship team. The challenge was accepted, and a home-and-home series was agreed upon. The first 2 games were played in Cheyenne's Pioneer Park in September of 1929, with Wyoming Governor Frank C. Emerson throwing out the first ball. The Marletts were a peculiar sight as they wore uniforms purchased from the Chicago White Sox, and the Sox insignia remained on their jerseys. The Major League Association did them no good, as the Stanic prevailed in both games 11-5 and 8-5. The series moved to Waukegan's Weiss Field, but the results remained the same. After winning the 2 games as part of the initial challenge, 2 more exhibition games were played, and the Stanczyks won them as well, sweeping all 6 games against the Marletts. Thus, they became the National Brothers Champions. The title was essentially self-proclaimed since there was no governing body to bestow the honor. Nonetheless, there were no other teams who could claim otherwise. In subsequent years, they continued to play, but only under the local spotlight. They won the Lake County Championship in 1931 by defeating St. Anthony, and again in 1933 by defeating the Knights of Lithuania. Never anxious to avoid a challenge, they responded to the Haas Brothers of Aurora, a fast-pitch softball team. The Stanczyks won a doubleheader, baseball in the afternoon and softball at night. Through the years, the lineup wasn't fixed. The brothers moved around, and non-family members often played with them. One constant was Bill, the second oldest and the pitcher. Local legend has him virtually unhittable when employing his splitter pitch. Though the pitch had been banned in the major leagues by that time, the ban did not extend to semi-pro pitchers, and Bill used that pitch to great effect. In the summer of 1935, a salesman for the New Seas Coffee Company arrived in Texas near Austin. He visited the store run by Fritz Dyke and learned that Fritz's 9 sons made up a baseball team. Intrigued by this promotional possibility, he proposed that his company sponsor a game if another all-brother team could be found. The Dykes agreed, and the search was on. The Marletts of Wyoming were contacted, but their team had recently disbanded. Then they found the Stanczyks, who agreed to play the game. The National Baseball Congress World Series was to be held in Wichita, Kansas, to determine the best semi-pro team. They allowed that the brothers could play an exhibition game after the tournament games were concluded that day. So at 10 p.m. on Sunday, August 18, 1935, the teams took the field. It wasn't a close game. The Wichita Eagle reported the 11-5 Stanic victory. The Dykes took a 3-0 lead, but a 7-run second inning settled the affair. Marvin Dyke was their starting pitcher and was relieved by brother Ed. Bill Stanic went all the way for his team, and there was no rematch. Like the Marletts, a few years earlier, the Stanic uniforms were unusual. Because of space limitations, the C was removed and Stanic was spelled out across the chest, Stanzak. The team must have approved since the same misspelling was used on team stationery in later years. One item appears regularly in stories about the Stanic-Dyke game in Wichita. Future President Lyndon B. Johnson was supposed to have played with the Dyke brothers. According to author Carlton Stowers of Oh Brother, How They Played the Game, Johnson, though, did not participate. Although he often played with the Dykes, he could not take part in Wichita. Rules for that game required each player to provide a birth certificate to prevent any ringers being on the field. Although the brothers continued to play baseball, time, age, and growing responsibilities began to take over. Eventually, they moved on. They remained in town working in local industry, running small businesses, holding political offices, and even one was a priest. For a time, Frank, Lewis, and Martin played in the minor leagues. They have all passed away from us, but their accomplishments remain. They were John, Bill, Joe, Frank, Mike, Ed, Bruno, Lewis, Martin, and Julius, the Stanic Brothers. The Stanics were inducted into Waukegan Sports Hall of Fame in 2005. Now, for Waukegan, we've had quite a few players go on to play professionally. At least 8 in the minor leagues and 12 in the major leagues. Not going to share all of their stories today. We're just going to talk about Robert O'Farrell. Undoubtedly, the most renowned Major League Baseball player from Waukegan is Bob O'Farrell. He was the first local boy to make the big time, played the longest, and gathered the most awards and acclaim. Bob was born October 19, 1896, to Sars O'Farrell, who eventually was a Waukegan fire chief. Bob showed his athletic ability early while playing for the high school. He was noted for his performance with a local semi-pro team at only the age of 16. He was playing for McCann's club. See, in 1915, the Chicago Cubs came to Waukegan for an exhibition game, and Bob impressed Cub manager Roger Bresnahan. He had a tryout with the Cubs and soon signed a contract with them. Ironically, Bob had been a White Sox fan until then. He was in 2 games for the Cubs at the end of that season. He spent the next 2 seasons with Peoria in the 31 League, with brief appearances with the Cubs at the end of each year. In 1918, Willis began his full-time Major League career. It was also the year of his first World Series appearance, although he failed to get a hit. After a couple of years, he became the Cubs' regular catcher, noted as one of the best defensive catchers in baseball. He matured as a hitter, batting about .320 in 1922 and again in 1923. In July 1924, Bob suffered a fractured skull when a foul ball broke his catcher's mask. He was out for an extended period and couldn't regain his job as he was replaced by future Hall of Famer Leo Gabby Hartman. May of the following season saw Bob traded to the St. Louis Cardinals, and he would become the regular catcher once again. In 1926 was Bob's year to remember. It was Game 7 of the 1926 World Series between the St. Louis Cardinals and the New York Yankees. It was the bottom of the 9th inning, with the home team, Yankees, down 2-1. There were 2 outs, and Babe Ruth had just drawn a walk and was on first base. With Bob Musial at the plate, Ruth took off for second base on the first pitch for Cleveland Alexander. The catcher of the Cardinals, Waukegan's Bob O'Farrell, threw the ball to second baseman Rogers Hornsby. Hornsby caught the ball and applied the tag. Ruth was out, the game and the series was over. This is the only time a World Series has ended with a player caught trying to steal a base. O'Farrell later asked Ruth why he had tried to steal. Ruth felt that Alexander was not focusing on him at first base, and Musial was a singles hitter. Ruth wanted to be in scoring position to tie up the ball game. Ruth said he thought he would make it. But Bob O'Farrell, well, he threw him out. After the season, Bob was selected as the National League's most valuable player. And to continue his successful season, he was appointed manager of the Cards the following year. Although the Cardinals won more games than the previous year, they did not repeat as pennant winners. Bob was relieved as manager and traded to the New York Giants in May 1928. He batted over 300 in 1929 and 1930, but he could only share catching duties. And he was traded back to St. Louis in 1932 and to Cincinnati in 1934. He was made playing manager with the Reds, but didn't last out the year. In June, he was part of history as the Reds became the first baseball team to travel by air. They flew a chartered plane from Chicago to Cincinnati. After the end of his managerial stint, Bob joined the Cubs for 22 games and rejoined St. Louis the following season for 14 more. His major league career ended September 23, 1935. He finished playing after 2 years in the minors with Rochester, New York. For his 21-year major league career, Bob played in almost 1,500 games, with 10 more in the World Series. He had 1,120 hits for a .273 lifetime batting average. Though never a long ball threat, he did end up with 51 home runs and 549 runs batted in. On August 29th, Bob opened O'Farrell's Recreation Center on Washington Street. He ran that business until 1961, and he was one of the initial inductees in the Waukegan Sports Hall of Fame in 1975. And Bob died in Waukegan February 20th, 1988. Now, a few years ago, we created an exhibit for the Waukegan History Museum called Play Ball, and Bob O'Farrell was, of course, featured in that. And we had some memorabilia on loan as well from Bob O'Farrell's goddaughter, Marilyn Moisio. And one of the things that Marilyn did was commission Alice Aviani with Family Piano to record the Cardinals song, Rip, 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 Zip, 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 Cardinals won the championship. So Alice is also a singer, and she is a singer in our Waukegan concert chorus. So you'll hear her singing that song. And the third verse, well, Bob O'Farrell is referenced there. The third verse reads, Ruth got first by the umpire's slip, tried to steal second by the same old trick, but O'Farrell's great arm threw him out, I vow. Wasn't that throw the cat's meow? That settled all, the last ball hurled, made the Cards champs of all the world. Rip, 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 zip, zip, zip. I do find it funny in verse 3 that even there, the Cardinals are complaining about the umpires. Yep, I'm a Cubs fan. So here, let's listen to the Cardinals song, Rip, 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 Zip, Zip, Zip. Cardinals won the championship. So that again was Alice Aviani, family piano here in Waukegan, singing the Cardinal song, Rip, 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 Zip, 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 Cardinals won the championship. And to close out here, I know that I'm missing not being able to watch baseball. My wife is not, but that's okay. But to end it with the major league teams, we can't watch them right now, but they actually did used to travel and play semi-pro teams like here in Waukegan. On Thursday, August 6, 1914, the Chicago White Sox came to town to play the Waukegan West Ends at Electric Park. The exhibition game was part of a Waukegan Day celebration. In front of nearly 3,500 fans, the locals succumbed by a score of 13-1. It was billed as the first Major League exhibition game ever held in the history of Waukegan. Not to be outdone, the Chicago Cubs came to Waukegan for a game the following year. They won over Waukegan 9-3. And in 1919, again, winning 5-4. When the Cubs played here in 1922, it was to honor Bob O'Farrell and Arnold Jiggerstats, both Waukegan boys playing for the Cubs. The game was played Thursday, September 28th at Electric Park, today's Weiss Field. O'Farrell and Stats autographed balls to be given to the winners of a raffle at Pierce Drugstore. So there you have it. Thank you for joining me today to talk about the history of baseball in Waukegan, or at least a little bit of it. Of course, with all these stories, there's so much more, but that's just a little bit of what there is for it. Keep joining the Waukegan History Museum Facebook page, checking daily. We have things going on, the top 50 history events. You can still hop on every day to vote on a new matchup. So we'll see what the top history event is this time compared to the last time we ran the tournament. We have what's in a name on the Facebook as well. So giving you a little bit of history behind the names of our parks, the people that they are named for. So you can find a lot of different things for history related in Waukegan with us there at the Waukegan History Museum page. And also you can find some of our old exhibits now on the Waukegan Historical Society website. I will be back with you next Friday we'll do another History Lunch and Learn at noon. That will be Titanic, A Fateful Ticket to Waukegan. Yes, Waukegan actually was able to be connected to the Titanic. So I will share that story with you all next week. Really through April, I'll be doing different programs on Fridays at noon. The following weekend, or the following Friday, will be Civil War stories. And I'm working on a new program right now, Waukegan Animal Stories. You guessed it, we just got done watching Tiger King, so I was thinking, well, we probably have some animal stories around here, so I'll be sharing those at some point, either in a history lunch and learn or maybe a history happy hour or something like that. Thank you again for joining. My name is Ty Rohr, Manager of Cultural Arts for the Waukegan Park District, working on behalf of the Waukegan History Museum and the Waukegan Historical Society. Again, thanks for joining today's episode, Play Ball, Baseball in Waukegan, a Waukegan History Museum Facebook Live History Lunch and Learn. This is Ty Rohr signing off.